The idea that overnight your driver's license no longer matches who you are, or your government doesn't recognize you as a legal person, sounds like a dystopian movie. But that is exactly what is happening in multiple states across the country. We are seeing a heap of anti trans laws being passed in Republican led states that doesn't tackle people's access to bathrooms or their sports participation. It tackles who they are as a legal person itself. They are redefining sex at the state level, which can lead to a heap of different discrimination in housing and employment. If you watch Kat's video from Courier about an anti trans law that was passed in Kansas overnight, that story was not an outlier. That is the trend for what is starting across the country. According to new reporting from the New York Times, Republican led states are expanding transgender restrictions beyond minors and athletics and into core areas of adult life. This article is titled, With New Momentum, Republican States Push Broader Limits for Trans Americans. In states that once focused mainly on healthcare and sports for transgender minors, debates now revolve around the validity of transgender identity. This is exactly what LGBTQ advocates have been talking about ever since trans people started to become a focal point of political debate. Trans people have existed for thousands of years among different cultures, different countries, but they've only recently come into the front and center of political conversations in the United States since about 2016. Since then, they have been debated whether or not we should give them rights, whether or not they should be recognized as people. And conservatives have done the exact same playbook that they've always done to attack civil rights, say this is for the children. Trans people can't be recognized for their humanity because it will confuse the children. It's all about the children. Children, children, children. We don't want to attack adults' rights. Adults can do whatever they want. It's the children, the children. That is all a lie. And that's what we're seeing right now with a lot of this legislation. This was never about the children. Using the children was always a scapegoat to attack the humanity of people who are gender nonconforming. I have a list of different anti trans bills that we'll go over now regarding each different state. In Kansas, the state is moving to invalidate gender marker changes on driver's licenses, and lawmakers have overridden a veto to require bathrooms in government buildings to match sex assigned at birth. In Idaho, officials have begun to prohibit changes to sex on birth certificates, and lawmakers are advancing measures that would increase liability for businesses over bathroom access. In Utah, lawmakers are debating removing anti discrimination protections in housing and employment. In Oklahoma, officials are exploring expanding restrictions on gender affirming care beyond minors and into adults. Across multiple states, all of these bills have similar results in how they affect both transgender minors and adults. Whenever you put restrictions on gender affirming care, that is restricting medical access to people who need that the most, not just trans people who do need gender affirming care, because all of the evidence points that it decreases suicidality, but even those that are cisgender. If somebody has low testosterone and they need testosterone boosters, we've seen these types of anti trans laws in Texas remove or limit the access for cis people to get that medicine. Gender affirming care happens in so many areas of life. Men have gender affirming care, women have gender affirming care, and it's not just for trans people. So the fact that we are trying to limit that simply because Republican lawmakers don't like trans people is not only discriminatory, but it's just not effective. We've seen anti trans discrimination before, but this phase is different in three distinct ways. First, they're no longer using the children language. It's not just, oh, we need to limit it for kids, blah, 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 blah. It's for the kids. You need to protect the kids. This is explicitly saying anybody who's trans, we do not want you to be able to recognize who you are. The state will no longer recognize that you are a woman or that you are a man. You have no control over that fact. The second thing is these are retroactive. It affects people who have already got these changes done. In places like Kansas, people who have followed the legal process for years to update their documents are now going to be seen as legally invalid. And three, it targets legal identity itself. And that matters because of how much daily life depends on government ID. Driver's licenses are required to get hired, to rent housing, open a bank account, travel, access healthcare, and in many cases, vote. If your ID no longer matches who you are or it becomes invalid, the impact isn't just symbolic. It's not just Republicans saying that they recognize two genders. It affects how people function day to day. There's a clear pathway between the states and federal policies under this administration, said the Reverend Jasmine Beach Favara, executive director of the Campaign for Southern Equality, an LGBTQ advocacy organization based in North Carolina. Our general analysis is that they will go as far as they think they can in enforcing what's fundamentally a very narrow ideological position that being transgender does not exist. That is not a reality. So, this reflects a broader strategy that conservative lawmakers are taking to move the discussion away from individual policy debates and into redefining sex within the state law itself. Rewriting the state laws specifically affects multiple industries, including identification documents, employment protections, housing rights, healthcare access, and public accommodations. We've already seen this at different state levels. In Iowa, they removed gender identity as a protected class in civil rights law. Several states now prohibit changing sex markers on birth certificates, and others require official documents to reflect sex assigned at birth. In other words, this is not a series of isolated bills that will have to fight and debate and deliberate throughout different state assemblies. This is a structural shift in how states define identity under the law. All these legal changes do is incentivize further discrimination. When we see anti discrimination protections removed, three big industries are affected. The first one's housing, where landlords can not only deny transgender applicants from being able to rent from them, but they can also evict transgender tenants even if they're following their lease agreements. Because the landlord can say, hey, I don't want this person living in my house. Their identity documents don't match who they are. They need to leave and get on the street. I don't really care what happens to them. Same thing with employment. Employers can now fire people just for being trans, and they can claim that they're committing identity fraud by not having proper legal documentations. Businesses can refuse service to trans people, simply saying, I don't want to serve to them. They're not presenting who they say they are. All of this has much broader implications than just conservatives saying they want to protect children or whatever it is that they say. It is about removing people's identity and their humanity by isolating them from broader society. If you haven't watched Kat's video yet, she made another video with Courier that was specifically going after Kansas's bounty hunter law that explicitly asked for private citizens or random people to patrol bathrooms to look for trans people and report them to authorities. That is absolutely insane. But it's important to see that context because it shows how quickly a lot of these bills can actually move, sometimes with little public attention that's passed secretly overnight, and how they affect real working people as they go to work, their housing, or their everyday life. And what we're seeing in Kansas was not an isolated case. This is the type of legislation that is trying to be passed in multiple states across the country. As we gear towards the midterm elections, we know that Republican attacks on transgender people are only going to continue to intensify. And that's why we have to demand that progressive politicians or people who believe in the rule of law and equal protection under the law should advocate on behalf of trans individuals who are explicitly being discriminated by Republican lawmakers. This new legislation really marks a turning point when it comes to trans visibility in the country. Conservative lawmakers have taken the mask off and are openly saying it's no longer about sports participations or minor gender affirming care or school usage. It is explicitly about erasing trans people from state law, regardless of whether or not somebody's already gotten recognition from legal entities and institutions. They want to take that away retroactively, and they want to prevent trans people from being themselves in the future. Because by limiting freedom, Republicans can seem like they have control over the political narrative and everyday life. And we are firmly saying that that needs to stop. This is no longer an isolated case in different states. This is a national trend that is openly defining how people are able to move about the life in a way that makes the most sense for them.